Have you ever been told without words that you don't belong? Imagine stepping onto a plane, holding a ticket you worked hard for, only to watch a crew try to strip away your dignity. No shouting, no scene, just the quiet cruelty of being told. That seat isn't for you. For Dr. Maya Henderson, a black woman and CEO. That moment wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a test. Should she stay silent, give in, move to a lesser seat, just to keep the peace? Or should she stand tall, risk everything, and claim her rightful place? What would you do if it were you if strangers stared? If bias pressed against your chest like heavy air? Would you shrink, or would you rise? This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about choices, about storms we all face, and the courage to meet them without breaking. Stay with me, because what happened next changed not only Maya's life, but sent shockwaves far beyond that airplane cabin. If you believe dignity matters, hit like, share, and subscribe, and let's step into the story together. The morning air at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport carried that familiar hum of movement. Rolling suitcases clicking against the floor, announcements echoing from the overhead speakers, a tide of travelers rushing toward gates, each with their own destination, their own story. Dr. Maya Henderson walked calmly through the terminal, her boarding pass tucked neatly inside her leather carry-on. She looked composed, almost serene. A tailored navy blue suit, simple pearl earrings, hair tied back. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy. Just a woman on her way to London for one of the most important negotiations of her career. Yet the stillness she carried contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. And in a few moments, that calm would be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. As she approached the first-class boarding lane at gate D23, she handed her pass to the gate agent, Daniel Brooks. He barely glanced at it before looking at her. His eyes lingered, then narrowed, as if something didn't quite add up. Ma'am, Daniel began, his voice tinged with hesitation. This is for seat 2A, in first class. Maya nodded gently. That's correct. He hesitated again, scanning the pass once more as though it must be a mistake. Around them, the line of passengers began to shift impatiently. People sighed, tapped their feet, checked their watches. Daniel finally spoke, his tone soft but cutting. Are you sure this is your ticket? The words landed heavier than they seemed. Maya felt her chest tighten. She had heard variations of this question her entire life, in classrooms, in stores, even once, at a luxury hotel check-in. Always the same undertone. Are you sure you belong here? She steadied her voice. Yes. I booked it myself. Daniel's lips pursed. He tapped a few keys on the monitor, shaking his head as if searching for something, anything that might disqualify her. Then he leaned in closer and lowered his voice. We may need you to move to economy. We've had some issues with this seat assignment. Maya's eyes flickered upward, calm, steady, but sharp. She didn't answer right away. Silence, after all, often speaks louder than words. Behind her, a man in a crisp gray suit stepped forward. Richard Kane, mid-50s, polished shoes, the kind of confidence that came not from manners, but from money. He smirked, then spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Let's not waste time here, he said, waving his own ticket. That seat's obviously for someone who actually paid for it. The crowd shifted. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others glanced at Maya with quiet judgment, and a few simply pulled out their phones, sensing a story was about to unfold. Maya took a slow breath. She remembered her father's words when she was a child. When they question your place, stand taller, but do it with grace. So she did. She stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes level, but her voice remained soft. "I assure you," she said, "I belong exactly where my ticket says." The tension was sharp enough to cut the air. Daniel looked uncertain. Richard looked annoyed. And the passengers around them leaned in, caught between curiosity and discomfort. It would have been easy to argue, to raise her voice, to let her anger spill out. But Maya had learned long ago that dignity wasn't loud. It was steady. What nobody knew, not Daniel, not Richard, not the restless travelers watching, was that Maya Henderson was no ordinary passenger. She was the CEO of Henderson Biotech, one of the fastest-growing biomedical firms in the country. A woman whose signature had moved billions of dollars in markets. A woman heading to London to finalize a $4 billion deal. But here, at Gate D23, none of that mattered. To Daniel, she was just another face he doubted. To Richard, she was someone to dismiss. And to Maya, in that moment, it was all too familiar. The sting of being questioned, not for what she had done, but for who she was. She adjusted the strap of her bag, met Daniel's eyes, and said quietly, "Scan the ticket again." The machine beeped, a green light flashed. Seat 2A, first class, valid, no errors. Daniel's face flushed, but before he could speak, Richard scoffed. "Unbelievable. This is holding everyone up." Maya stepped forward, boarding pass in hand, her footsteps measured, her posture unbroken. She didn't look back, though she felt every eye on her. What no one realized was that within minutes before the plane even left the ground, this quiet woman would turn the entire cabin upside down. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She didn't even flinch. She just made one simple call. And seconds later, the entire first-class cabin would belong to her. They told her she didn't belong in first class, but they had no idea who they were talking to. Long before that morning at Dallas-Fort Worth, long before the boarding gate and the cold stares. Dr. Maya Henderson had been walking through rooms where people questioned if she belonged. She grew up in a modest neighborhood outside Houston, the second daughter of a school teacher and a postal worker. Her parents never had much, but what they gave her was priceless. They gave her books. They gave her quiet confidence. And they gave her a belief that no matter where she went, her presence had value. Maya often recalled the kitchen table lessons her father taught her. He would place an empty chair across from her, pat it gently, and say, "This seat is yours. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." As a child, she thought it was just a metaphor. As a woman standing at the gates of power, she realized it was a prophecy. Her childhood wasn't free of scars. She remembered the first time she was followed in a store at the age of 13, accused of stealing lip gloss she had never touched. She remembered the awkward silence in her high school debate club when she won first place, as if her victory wasn't supposed to happen. Those memories didn't break her. They bent into steel within her. By the time she was 18, Maya had earned a full scholarship to Stanford. She studied relentlessly, majoring in molecular biology while juggling 3 part-time jobs to send money home. She learned how to thrive in labs that often overlooked her and in boardrooms that rarely welcomed her. Each closed door was fuel. Each dismissive glance became a lesson. Decades later, Henderson Biotech was her life's work. The company started in a borrowed lab space with 2 researchers and a dream to develop affordable therapies for autoimmune diseases. Today, it was a multi-billion-dollar firm with offices in 4 countries and clinical trials that promised to change lives. Investors spoke her name with respect. Scientists followed her lead. Politicians called for her expertise. And yet, despite it all, she still encountered moments like the one at Gate D23. The reminders that in some eyes, her worth could still be questioned, reduced to the color of her skin or the softness of her voice. Her mornings reflected who she was, disciplined yet human. She preferred waking before sunrise, when the world was quiet. She would grind fresh coffee beans, pour hot water slowly, and savor the first sip. Sometimes she sat by the window with a notebook, scribbling fragments of ideas, half scientific notes, half personal reflections. On her desk at home, there was always a single vase with fresh roses, red ones in spring, white ones in summer. She liked the way their petals softened the edges of a hard day. Colleagues often described her as calm, even unshakable. But Maya knew calm didn't mean untouched. Inside her, there were storms she never allowed to break the surface. She remembered the nights lying awake, wondering if the next deal would fall through, or if her company could survive one more setback. She carried those worries quietly, the way strong people often do. That morning in Dallas wasn't just another business trip. She was flying to London to finalize negotiations with Sterling Rowe Group, a powerhouse in European biotech. The deal, valued at over $4 billion, would expand her company's reach into new markets and fund breakthroughs her team had been chasing for years, for months. Her staff had poured themselves into preparation. Her signature would decide not only the future of her company, but the future of patients waiting desperately for treatments. But the flight itself was more than transportation. It was symbolic. For Maya, each first-class ticket wasn't just a seat. It was a quiet declaration. I earned this. I belong here. It was a reminder of her father's words at the kitchen table, of the empty chair that was always hers. Yet, as she walked toward the boarding gate that morning, those old questions still echoed in her mind. She had rehearsed her presentation for London countless times, but she hadn't rehearsed this. How do you defend your right to sit in a seat you already paid for? How do you respond to a stranger who doubts your place without knowing your story? She carried these questions as lightly as possible, but they were there. Her assistant, back at headquarters in Houston, had texted her before the flight safe travels. Dr. H., we're rooting for you. She smiled at the thought, tucking her phone away. Her team didn't see the battles outside the labs. They only saw her victories, and maybe that was enough. Maya knew she had options. She could avoid the confrontation, accept the downgrade, and still arrive in London. She would still give her presentation. She would still negotiate. She would still win. But something in her resisted that choice. Something deep inside whispered that yielding now would mean more than a seat. It would mean giving up the dignity she had been building her entire life. In the quiet space between footsteps, she debated with herself. Was it worth the energy? Was it worth the stares, the whispers, the story that would follow her onto the plane? The answer came from memory. She recalled her mother's tired smile after a 12-hour nursing shift. She recalled her sister, a teacher, who once cried after a parent accused her of being too strict with a child simply because of the color of her skin. She thought of the young interns in her company, bright women who looked to her as proof that the glass ceiling could be broken. And suddenly, the question shifted. It wasn't about whether it was worth it for her. It was about whether it was worth it for them. Maya adjusted the strap of her carry-on and straightened her posture. Her voice, when it came, was steady but firm. She would not let herself shrink. What passengers saw that morning was a well-dressed woman holding a boarding pass. What they didn't see was the weight of decades carried in her silence. They didn't see the history that shaped her, the quiet rituals that steadied her, the sacrifices that had led her to that very gate. And when Richard Kane scoffed, when Daniel Brooks hesitated, when strangers glanced with judgment, none of them knew the truth of who she was. But soon they would, because Maya Henderson had lived her life preparing for moments like these, not by accident, not by luck, but by a choice made long ago to never let anyone else define where she belonged. That choice would become clear within minutes, and when the story of that flight was retold online, in boardrooms, in classrooms across the country, it would not be remembered as a simple boarding dispute. It would be remembered as the day a quiet woman rewrote the rules of belonging. For now, though, Maya simply walked toward the jet bridge, her steps unhurried, her spirit unbroken. She knew a storm was waiting at the cabin door. She also knew she carried the calm to meet it. The jet bridge loomed just beyond the boarding scanner, but Maya Henderson found herself still standing there, held back not by faulty technology, but by doubt that wore a human face. Daniel Brooks tapped the monitor again, his eyes darting between her ticket and the screen. He looked less like a professional now, and more like a man trying to convince himself that his instincts were correct. "Ma'am," he said again, a note sharper this time. "This seat is complicated. I may need you to wait off to the side." A few people in line exhaled impatiently. A mother shifted her toddler from one hip to the other. A businessman checked his watch and muttered something under his breath. And behind them, Richard Kane stepped closer, his cologne sharp, his voice deliberately loud. "This is ridiculous," Richard said. "We all know how this ends. Some of us paid good money to be up there. Don't hold up the line." Daniel didn't stop him. He didn't ask him to wait quietly like he had asked Maya. Instead, he nodded faintly, as if Richard's complaint carried legitimacy. Maya's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. "The ticket is valid. You scanned it once. The seat is mine." Richard chuckled under his breath. "Sure, until they figure out it isn't." The words weren't just about a seat. They were about worth, about belonging. Maya knew it. The people around her knew it. The air itself seemed to tighten. For a moment, she considered letting it go. She could step aside, board later, prove her point in silence. But then she caught sight of a young woman at the back of the line, maybe mid-20s, clutching her passport, watching nervously. Their eyes met. The woman offered a quick, encouraging smile. Maya understood instantly. Someone was watching how she handled this. Someone younger. Someone who might one day face the same moment. So she stood her ground. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone calm but unyielding. "Either scan the ticket again or call your supervisor." "I'm not moving." Daniel's fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard. The authority he usually carried had slipped. But before he could make a decision, Clara Whitmore arrived. The purser's uniform was crisp, her posture sharp, her eyes already narrowing as she approached. "What's going on here?" Clara asked. Daniel gestured toward Maya. "Possible ticketing issue. Seat 2A. Clara looked Maya up and down, slowly, as though measuring her. Then she tilted her head slightly, lips pursed. "Ma'am," Clara said, "we've had some problems with upgrades and seat duplication. Are you sure you're in the right place?" The repetition stung. Maya heard her father's voice again. "This seat is yours. Don't let them tell you otherwise." "Yes," Maya answered firmly. "This is my ticket. This is my seat." Richard chuckled again. Unbelievable. Wasting everyone's time. The crowd shifted restlessly. Phones came out. A man in a baseball cap whispered to his wife, This is about to get ugly." Another woman sighed loudly, muttering, "Always drama at the gate." Maya felt every eye on her, felt the weight of being made into a spectacle. She had spent years blending in where she wasn't wanted, years softening herself to survive rooms that weren't built for her. But today, something inside refused to bend. "Scan it," she repeated. Clara exchanged a look with Daniel, then reluctantly motioned toward the scanner. Daniel held the ticket under the red light. Beep. Green. Seat 2A. Valid. Maya reached for the pass, but Clara's hand landed gently on her arm. Not rough, but controlling. "Let's avoid confusion once we're on board," Clara said. "Why don't we reseat you in economy for this leg? We can issue a voucher. You'll be more comfortable without all this tension." The suggestion hung in the air, wrapped in false courtesy. More comfortable meant invisible. More comfortable meant erased. Maya's eyes locked on Clara's. The purser's gaze was steady, confident, unshaken by the beep of the scanner that had already proven Maya's claim. She wasn't dealing with a mistake. She was dealing with a belief, one that said women like her didn't belong in seat 2A. And in that realization, Maya felt the old fire rise. "No," she said simply. Her refusal cut through the noise. Passengers paused. Even Richard went quiet for a moment. Maya slipped the ticket from Daniel's fingers, stepped forward, and placed her foot on the jet bridge. Richard's voice broke the silence. "She'll regret this." Maya didn't look back. The jet bridge stretched ahead like a tunnel, each step echoing louder than the last. She felt her pulse in her throat, but she forced her breathing steady. She could sense Clara behind her, still watching, still planning. There would be another confrontation once she reached the cabin, but she was ready. As Maya walked, she remembered something else her father had told her at that kitchen table. Sometimes they will fight you hardest right at the door. That's when you don't stop walking. At the cabin entrance, a young flight attendant smiled nervously, scanning her ticket one more time. His hands trembled slightly, as though he had already heard whispers from Clara, but the screen turned green again. Seat 2A. Maya thanked him softly and stepped into the gleaming first-class cabin. Leather seats, soft lighting, quiet space. For some, just a luxury. For her, it was symbolic. It was proof that she belonged exactly where she stood. But even as she set her bag down, she knew the storm wasn't over. Richard Kane had boarded right behind her, glaring as he passed. Clara's footsteps followed close, carrying the authority of her uniform. The atmosphere inside the cabin shifted. Passengers sensed tension. A few raised their phones, subtle but deliberate. Maya lowered herself into her seat, straightened her back, and folded her hands in her lap. Her silence was not surrender. It was patience. She had chosen to hold her ground. And in just a few minutes, that choice would ignite a chain of events no one in that cabin would ever forget. The hush of the first-class cabin was a world away from the noise at the gate. The lights glowed soft amber. The leather seats gleamed, and a faint scent of citrus hung in the air. But for Dr. Maya Henderson, stepping into this space felt less like entering comfort and more like stepping into an arena. She set her carry-on down gently in the overhead bin, then lowered herself into seat 2A. The cushion gave beneath her weight, but her body stayed taut, as though every muscle remained on guard. Passengers across the aisle stole glances, some discreet, others not at all. One man in a navy blazer raised his eyebrows at her, whispering something to his wife. Another woman fiddled with her phone, holding it upright a second too long before tucking it away. Everyone had seen the standoff at the gate. Now, curiosity traveled with them into the cabin. Maya folded her hands in her lap, staring straight ahead. She wanted to close her eyes, to find the calm she always carried into high-stakes negotiations. But there was no calm here, only the weight of eyes pressing down. The sound of measured footsteps pulled her attention. Clara Whitmore entered, her heels clicking against the aisle floor. Her face was carefully neutral, but her eyes betrayed irritation. She stopped beside Maya's seat, posture stiff, arms clasped behind her back like a soldier preparing for battle. "Ma'am," Clara said smoothly, "we'll need to verify your seat one more time. There have been inconsistencies." Maya turned her head slowly, meeting Clara's gaze. Her voice was even, her words deliberate. It was verified at the gate. Twice. Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. Sometimes errors slip through. We wouldn't want any confusion once the flight is underway. Richard Kane, sliding into seat 2B, smirked. He leaned closer, his tone dripping with condescension. "You'd be doing everyone a favor. You know, avoiding more embarrassment." Maya looked at him briefly, then back to Clara. She didn't take the bait. Silence could be sharper than argument. Around them, passengers pretended to adjust headphones, check seat controls, or unfold newspapers. But every ear was tuned in. The air seemed to tighten, as if the cabin itself were holding its breath. Clara cleared her throat. "I'll ask once more. Ma'am, would you prefer to take a seat in the main cabin? We can offer additional amenities for your trouble." The offer sounded like kindness, but the undertone was dismissal. It wasn't about comfort. It was about displacement. Maya inhaled slowly. Her chest rose and fell, calm but deliberate. Inside, her thoughts churned. She remembered the store clerk who had followed her as a teenager. She remembered the professor who once called her articulate for her background. She remembered all the ways people had tried to reseat her in life, pushing her toward the back, never expecting her to stay in the front. Not today. Her voice came low, steady. "No, this is my seat. I'll stay here." The refusal echoed louder than any argument could have. Richard chuckled, shaking his head, muttering to himself. Clara's smile thinned into a line. "Very well," Clara said curtly. "We'll revisit this if needed." She moved on, her heels clicking away down the aisle. Maya sat back, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hand trembled slightly, so she pressed it against the armrest until the shaking stilled. Moments later, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Good for you," an elderly woman whispered from across the aisle. She had silver hair pulled into a bun, gentle eyes framed by glasses. Her name, as Maya would later learn, was Evelyn Harper. "Don't let them push you." Maya turned her head, meeting Evelyn's eyes. Gratitude flickered there, unspoken but deep. She gave a small nod, her lips curving into the faintest smile. The silence of the cabin resumed, but the tension remained. Richard shifted noisily in his seat, making sure his disapproval was noticed. Maya ignored him, pulling a folder from her bag and setting it on her lap. She flipped it open, reviewing her notes for London, though her eyes blurred over the words. Her mind was not on molecules or mergers. It was on the storm brewing around her. Minutes passed. Passengers trickled in. The cabin filled, but the air never lightened. Maya could feel it pressing against her skin, the invisible weight of judgment. When the captain's voice finally crackled through the speakers, welcoming passengers and announcing the flight time to London, it was almost a relief. Engines hummed outside, the jet bridge pulled away, and the familiar shudder of preparation rippled through the plane. But Clara wasn't finished. As the attendants conducted their checks, Clara returned to 2A. She leaned down, her voice just above a whisper, her tone firm. "You're drawing attention. If you don't move, it could escalate." Maya met her eyes, calm but unyielding. "The attention isn't my doing. I'm seated where I belong." Clara's eyes hardened. "Then be prepared for consequences." The words lingered in the air as she walked away. Maya sat perfectly still, her pulse steadying, her face unreadable. She had learned long ago that battles weren't always fought with raised voices. Some were fought with presence, with the refusal to move. She adjusted her seatbelt, placed her folder back in her bag, and folded her hands once more in her lap. The engines roared louder, the plane trembled, and the runway stretched ahead. And though the flight had barely begun, Maya knew this was no ordinary journey. It wasn't just a trip across the Atlantic. It was a test of dignity, a test of resolve, a test she intended to pass. The cabin was darkened now, shades drawn as the aircraft climbed into the evening sky. The soft hum of engines filled the silence. To most, it was just another flight. But for Dr. Maya Henderson, every second felt like a continuation of the confrontation that had begun on the ground. She sat in seat 2A, spine straight, eyes fixed on the window. Beyond the glass stretched a canvas of clouds tinted by fading sunlight. Beautiful, yes, but she barely saw it. Her mind was turning over the words Clara Whitmore had left her with. Be prepared for consequences. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. Maya drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly. She had spent her life measured against other people's doubts, navigating doors that opened reluctantly, proving herself again and again. She thought she had grown used to it. But this moment felt heavier, almost symbolic. To give in would mean more than losing a seat. It would mean letting the quiet erosion of dignity win again. Richard Kane reclined beside her, shifting noisily, making a point of his disapproval. He scrolled on his phone, shaking his head every few moments, muttering under his breath. His presence was like static electricity, sharp and irritating. Maya ignored him. She had learned long ago that the greatest response to provocation was composure. Still, a part of her wrestled inside. Was this worth it? Was staying in 2A worth the glares, the whispers, the open hostility of a crew who controlled the experience of the flight? She had meetings in London. She needed rest, clarity, not another battlefield. Her phone buzzed faintly in her lap. She glanced down, heart-catching for a moment when she saw the name flashing on the screen, Amelia Johnson, her chief of staff. Maya hesitated. Calls during flights weren't standard, but the aircraft still climbed, Wi-Fi not yet activated. She could draft a message instead. Her fingers hovered above the screen, then stopped. She stared at Amelia's name, at the sense of grounding it brought. Amelia, who had been with her since the early days of Henderson Biotech, who knew every battle fought to build the company, who had once told Maya, "You don't just sit at tables, you build them." Maya tapped out a message, short, direct, almost reckless. "Amelia, buy the remaining seats in first class. All of them. Do it now." She hit send before doubt could interfere. For a moment she sat frozen, staring at her phone as though it might take the words back. But the message had already flown, carried across satellites and signals to someone she trusted implicitly. Richard glanced sideways. smirking. "Texting your lawyer, hoping someone will save you." Maya turned her head, her eyes calm, unshaken, something like that. The minutes crawled by. Attendants moved through the aisles, checking belts, offering drinks, smiling at some passengers while ignoring others. Maya was among the ignored. It was a familiar omission, the kind that stung less with age but never lost its sting. Then her phone lit up again. A message from Amelia. Done. All seats confirmed under Henderson Holdings. Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest, not of pride, but of resolve. She closed her eyes, exhaled, then opened them again with quiet clarity. The cabin around her hadn't changed, passengers still settled in, attendants still moving, but the ground beneath her had shifted. She leaned back, folding her hands together, waiting. It didn't take long. Clara returned, her face carefully controlled, her eyes sharp. She bent toward Maya, voice just above a whisper. "Ma'am, I must insist one last time. This seat isn't for you." Maya turned, her tone soft but edged with steel. "Actually, Clara, it is. And so are all the others." Confusion flickered in Clara's eyes. "Excuse me." Maya held up her phone, turning the screen so Clara could see the confirmation email. Rows of seats listed under one name, Henderson Holdings. "I've purchased every first-class seat on this flight," Maya said evenly. "Which means, technically, you're speaking to the only passenger in this cabin." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Clara blinked, her composure faltering for the first time. Around them, passengers stirred, whispers rising. Richard leaned forward, craning his neck toward the screen, disbelief etched across his face. You can't be serious," Clara stammered. "I am," Maya replied. Her tone remained calm, but her eyes locked onto Clara's with unyielding focus. "So unless you intend to eject me from a cabin I now own in full, I suggest we both settle into this flight with dignity." The hush in the cabin deepened. Even the steady hum of engines seemed muted against the weight of her words. Richard sputtered beside her. "You think money makes you better than us, that you can just buy your way out of Maya." Turned to him, her voice quiet but cutting. "No, money doesn't make me better, but it does make me undeniable. You can question my presence. You can doubt my worth. What you cannot do is erase me." Richard's mouth opened, then closed. For once, he had no response. Clara stood straighter, jaw tight, eyes darting between Maya and the phone screen. She gave a curt nod, then stepped back. "Very well, ma'am. Enjoy your seats." Her tone cracked faintly on the last word. She walked away quickly, retreating to the galley, her poise shaken. Maya sat back in 2A, steadying her breath. Her pulse had spiked, her palms damp, but her face betrayed none of it. Outwardly, she was calm. Inwardly, she felt the swell of something larger than triumph. This wasn't about comfort, or even principle. It was about sending a message not only to Clara or Richard, but to everyone watching quietly from the sidelines. That message was simple. Some battles are not fought with fists or fury, but with the refusal to yield, the insistence on presence, the declaration that dignity is not negotiable. The elderly woman across the aisle, Evelyn Harper, caught Maya's eye again. She gave a small smile, her voice warm. "Good for you, dear. Good for you." Maya returned the smile. Softer this time. For the first time since boarding, she felt a glimmer of peace. The cabin settled into silence once more. Passengers shifted in their seats, some avoiding her gaze, others sneaking looks filled with new respect. Richard turned away, staring out the window, his jaw tight. Clara remained out of sight, but Maya knew this wasn't over. The real battles lay ahead in London, in boardrooms, in spaces where bias wore sharper suits and smiled through contracts. Still, this moment mattered. As the plane leveled at cruising altitude, Maya closed her eyes briefly. She pictured Amelia on the other end of that text, working quickly, efficiently, with the loyalty that had carried them through years of struggle. She pictured the young girls who might one day hear this story, who might sit a little taller knowing someone like them had refused to move. She opened her eyes again, gaze steady, heart calm. The flight stretched ahead, hours across an ocean. But for now, she sat in her rightful place, and she intended to remain there. The glow of the overhead lights dimmed further, and the cabin shifted into its nighttime rhythm. The clinking of glasses quieted, footsteps softened, and the wide body of the plane seemed to exhale as passengers slipped into rest. Dr. Maya Henderson remained awake. She had never been the kind of traveler who slept easily in the air, and tonight her thoughts refused to let her rest. The earlier confrontation with Clara Whitmore and Richard Kane still pulsed in her mind, but now it mingled with something deeper, a sense of gravity. She had made her stand. She had bought the cabin, but the ripples of that choice would stretch far beyond this flight. Evelyn Harper, the elderly woman across the aisle, leaned slightly toward her. "You're not closing those eyes tonight, are you?" Maya smiled faintly. "Doesn't look like it." "Too much adrenaline," Evelyn said knowingly. "I saw it in your face when you told her. Calm as a still lake on the surface, but I'll bet you were paddling underneath." Maya chuckled softly. "You're not wrong." The older woman sipped her tea, her silver hair catching the muted light. "You did the right thing. I don't mean the money part, though Lord knows that shut a few mouths. I mean the not budging part. Sometimes we have to plant ourselves where we are and let the world know we won't move." Her words reminded Maya of something her grandmother once said. "Stand like an oak, child. Winds will come, but your roots are deeper." Maya nodded, her voice quiet. "It's exhausting sometimes, always having to prove, just to sit where you've paid to sit." Evelyn reached across the aisle, her hand resting briefly on Maya's arm. "And yet you keep proving. That's strength. Don't mistake it for a burden." For a moment, Maya let herself breathe into those words. Strength, not burden. Perhaps that was the truth she needed to carry into the days ahead. Hours passed. The cabin grew hushed, filled with the soft chorus of sleeping breaths. Richard Kane had finally reclined, his snores rhythmic and sharp, like an uninvited metronome. Clara appeared only sparingly, her professional mask pulled tighter, eyes avoiding Maya's seat. Maya opened her laptop, its glow illuminating her thoughtful face. A presentation filled the screen, slides meticulously prepared for the Sterling Row Group negotiations in London. She scrolled through charts, projections, molecular models, her finger hovering over key talking points. Henderson Biotech was on the cusp of a breakthrough treatment for rare autoimmune disorders, but they needed Sterling Row's distribution network to bring it worldwide. The partnership could mean thousands of lives changed. But now she knew tomorrow's boardroom would not be neutral ground. Richard Kane wasn't just another arrogant passenger. He was an executive power broker inside the very company she was negotiating with. And he had seen her not as a partner, but as an intruder. The thought twisted in her stomach. Would he try to use tonight's incident against her? Would he whisper doubts into the ears of those who sat across the table? She closed the laptop slowly. These were questions without answers for now. Maya folded her arms on the table and let her forehead rest lightly against them. She wasn't asleep, but she wasn't entirely awake either. Her mind drifted backward, unbidden, to moments she thought she'd left behind. The first time she had been told she didn't look like a scientist, the professor who assumed she was in the wrong lecture hall, the investor who asked to speak to the real CEO. Each memory pressed against her like stones in a river, shaping her resilience, hardening her resolve. She hadn't built Henderson Biotech by yielding. She had built it by staying. She straightened again, brushing away the weight of old echoes. The past could inform her, but it would not define her next move. A flight attendant, younger than the others, approached tentatively. Her name tag read Sophie. She looked barely out of her 20s, her dark hair pulled back, her posture careful. "Dr. Henderson," Sophie said softly, glancing toward the galley as though making sure Clara wasn't watching. "I just wanted to say, I admire what you did earlier. Most people would have just moved." Maya studied her for a moment, hearing the sincerity in her voice. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Sophie hesitated, then lowered her voice further. "I'm new. First international rotation. I want to do this job right, but sometimes the way things are run, it doesn't sit right. Tonight reminded me I can choose how I treat people, no matter what anyone else does." Maya felt her chest tighten with something close to pride. Even here, amid hostility, a seed of change had found its soil. Hold on to that. Sophie. That choice, that's what will make you great at this. The young attendant's eyes brightened. She gave a small nod, then disappeared down the aisle, shoulders straighter. Maya leaned back, the quiet satisfaction of the exchange settling over her. Even small moments mattered. Perhaps especially small moments. The hours ticked on. Passengers stirred, the first hints of breakfast trays clattering in the galley. Outside the window, dawn painted the horizon in faint streaks of orange and pink. The Atlantic stretched endlessly below, carrying them toward London and everything waiting there. Maya gathered her things, tucking away her laptop, smoothing her jacket. She caught her reflection faintly in the window, a woman calm, composed, but undeniably bracing for the storm ahead. Evelyn stirred again, eyes opening as the light reached her. "Almost there," she murmured. Maya smiled gently. "Almost, but inside." Her thoughts were sharper. She knew the landing wouldn't be the end of this journey. It would be the true beginning. The aircraft descended, wheels kissing the tarmac with practiced grace. Passengers applauded half-heartedly, stretching, gathering their bags. Clara reappeared with her polished smile restored, though her eyes remained wary of Maya. Richard Kane adjusted his tie, his glance sliding toward her with something between disdain and calculation. As the doors opened, cool London air rushed into the cabin. Maya stepped onto the jet bridge, the weight of the past night folding into the present moment. Whatever storm awaited at Sterling Row, she was ready to meet it, because she carried more than her seat. She carried her dignity, and she had no intention of surrendering it. London greeted Dr. Maya Henderson with gray skies and the crisp bite of autumn air. Black taxis lined the curb at Heathrow, their headlights slicing through drizzle. As her driver steered toward Canary Wharf, Maya pressed her forehead lightly against the window. The city blurred past brick row houses, the Thames flowing steady and dark, cranes clawing at the skyline. She thought of Dallas, of the boarding gate, of Clara Whitmore's steely eyes. The echoes of the cabin still clung to her like static. But there was no time to dwell. In less than an hour, She would be sitting across from executives who could determine the next chapter of Henderson Biotech, and one of them would be Richard Kane. The driver stopped in front of Sterling Row Group's headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel. Mia stepped out, heels clicking against the pavement, the collar of her navy coat turned up against the wind. For a moment she stood still, looking up at the building. It seemed designed to intimidate, tall, cold, impersonal. But intimidation was something she had lived with all her life and survived. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the morning light. Her receptionist directed her toward the executive elevators, where Amelia Johnson was already waiting. Amelia's sharp eyes scanned Maya quickly, as if checking for cracks. "You look calm," Amelia said. "Do I?" Maya asked, lips curving slightly. "You do. And that's exactly what they don't expect." The elevator doors closed, carrying them upward. Maya straightened her jacket. "Let them underestimate me. It will only make what comes next more clear." The boardroom on the 40th floor stretched wide, its walls lined with glass that overlooked the Thames. A long table gleamed under pendant lights. Men and women in tailored suits sat in high-backed chairs, their expressions neutral but watchful. At the far end sat Charles Whitfield, Sterling Row's chairman, silver-haired and precise. To his right, Richard Kane. His eyes flicked up as Maya entered, a smile sliding across his face like a blade. Well, Dr. Henderson, I trust your flight was uneventful." His voice carried the faintest mockery, the kind that only she would hear. Maya met his gaze, unblinking, eventful enough to remind me why I'm here. The room stirred faintly, curiosity sparking. Charles Whitfield gestured to a chair near the center. "Let's begin." Maya took her seat, Amelia beside her. She set her leather portfolio on the table, hands folded calmly on top. Around her, Sterling Row's executives adjusted their papers, flicked pens, opened laptops, but all eyes, for a fraction of a second, seemed fixed on her. Charles cleared his throat. "Dr. Henderson, we've reviewed your proposal. Henderson Biotech has achieved remarkable results in early trials, but scaling a therapy of this nature is a significant undertaking. We need to be certain of your stability, your ability to deliver." Maya inclined her head. "Of course. Stability has been my business from the beginning. I built Henderson Biotech from 2 researchers in a rented basement lab to a global firm. We don't just promise, we deliver." Richard leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Impressive story. But stories don't always align with reality. I've heard concerns, questions of leadership, of whether Henderson Biotech has the structure to manage something of this scale. Some even wonder if you're, how shall I put this, stretching yourself too thin." The air in the room cooled. The subtext was sharp, intentional. Maya felt Amelia tense beside her, but she kept her expression serene. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. "Mr. Kane, I assure you, Henderson Biotech is not defined by speculation. We're defined by data. Would you like me to walk you through the numbers?" Charles gestured. "Please do." Maya opened her portfolio, sliding forward charts and graphs. She spoke with quiet precision. Clinical trial outcomes, patient recovery statistics, cost analyses, projected revenues. Her voice filled the room, not loud but firm, weaving fact with vision. The therapy wasn't just profitable, it was transformative. As she spoke, some executives leaned in, brows lifting, interest flickering in their eyes. She saw it, the shift, doubt softening into curiosity, curiosity into belief. But Richard interrupted, his tone sharp. And yet, scale requires more than numbers. It requires leadership that commands trust. Tell me, Dr. Henderson, do you really believe global markets will put their faith in you? The question hung heavy. Around the table, a few heads turned, some uncomfortable, others waiting. Maya let silence stretch just long enough to steady her breath. Then she spoke, her words deliberate. I don't just believe it. I've seen it. Patients put their trust in us because our work restores their lives. Investors put their trust in us because we've never failed to meet a milestone. And teams put their trust in me because I don't lead from above, I lead alongside them. That's the difference. That's why Henderson Biotech stands where it does today. Her gaze swept the table, then returned to Richard. So to answer your question, yes, the markets will trust me, because I've already earned it. A murmur rippled through the room. Even Charles leaned back slightly, his eyes assessing. Richard's jaw tightened. He shifted in his chair, but his smirk faltered. For the first time, Maya saw him unsettled. Charles raised a hand. Let's focus. The proposal is sound. The science is compelling. What remains is whether Sterling Rowe sees Henderson Biotech as a partner we can align with, culturally as well as operationally. Maya caught the subtle weight in his words. Culture, a polite word often used to mask bias. She leaned forward, folding her hands. Culture matters, which is why I want to be clear. This isn't just about a deal. It's about how we choose to shape the future of healthcare. Will it be defined by hesitation and exclusion, or will it be defined by courage and innovation? Henderson Biotech is ready for the latter. The question is, are you the room stilled? It was a risk, turning the question back on them. But Maya's voice carried not defiance, but conviction, an invitation to step into something larger. Charles studied her for a long moment. Finally, he said, we'll take a short recess. Chairs scraped. Conversation sparked quietly as the board members rose. Richard lingered, leaning close as others drifted out. You think one performance erases what people really see when they look at you, he murmured. Don't fool yourself. You'll never belong at this table. Maya turned her head, meeting his eyes. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. Then maybe the table needs to change. For the briefest moment. Richard's expression faltered. Then he stood and walked away. Maya sat back, exhaling slowly. Her pulse was steady, her mind clear. The storm had only begun, but she was still standing. The corridor outside the Sterling Rowe boardroom buzzed with low voices. Assistants shuffled papers. Executives checked phones. Coffee cups steamed in porcelain saucers. Dr. Maya Henderson stepped aside near a tall window overlooking the Thames, letting the cool glass calm her nerves. Beside her, Amelia Johnson leaned in, her tone low. He's going to try something. I could see it in Kane's face before the recess. He won't give this up quietly. Maya nodded once, her gaze steady on the skyline. I know. The question is how far he's willing to go. They didn't have to wait long for the answer. From the corner of her eye, Maya saw Richard Kane across the hall, phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped but intense. Two junior executives hovered near him, listening with unease. He ended the call sharply, then approached Charles Whitfield, speaking in hushed tones. Charles's face tightened, his jaw stiff. Moments later, Charles called everyone back into the boardroom. The atmosphere had shifted. Where curiosity and cautious respect had lingered before, now there was tension, the kind that made shoulders stiffen and glances dart. Charles cleared his throat as they settled. Before we continue, Certain concerns have been raised. Richard leaned forward, his tone silky. Yes. During the recess, new information came to my attention. It appears that Henderson Biotech is under investigation for financial irregularities. Questions about the legitimacy of certain trial expenditures, payments routed through secondary firms. Gas murmured around the table. Papers shuffled. Someone whispered, "Serious, if true." Maya felt the words strike like cold water. She sat very still, her heartbeat quickening. This was the play. Manufactured doubt, the oldest trick in the book. She placed her hands calmly on the table. That's false. Richard smiled thinly. Is it because the documentation I've just received suggests otherwise? He tapped his tablet, projecting a series of highlighted reports onto the screen at the front of the room. Numbers, names, transfers. It looked damning at a glance. Charles's eyes narrowed. Dr. Henderson, do you have an explanation for this? Maya studied the screen, then looked directly at Richard. I do, and the explanation is that this is a fabrication. The room stirred again. Some looked doubtful, others curious. Richard's voice grew sharper. Convenient, but documents don't lie. Maya leaned forward, her voice steady, cutting through the whispers. Documents can be forged, data can be manipulated, and doubt can be planted by those who fear losing control. She let her gaze sweep the table, then returned to Richard. The timing is no coincidence. 20 minutes ago, there was no mention of any irregularities. And now suddenly an entire file appears, courtesy of the one man who has made it clear he doesn't believe I belong here. The silence was thick, eyes darting between them. Amelia slid a folder across the table to Maya. Maya opened it, pulling out her own set of documents, audited financials, independently verified. She distributed copies with measured calm. These, Maya said, her voice unwavering, are our most recent audits, conducted by Deloitte. Transparent, independent, and clean. Every expenditure accounted for. Every trial verified. If Sterling Rowe wishes, you may contact the auditors directly. You'll find no irregularities. She closed the folder and folded her hands again. The only irregularity here is the desperation of someone who would rather fabricate shadows than face the light. Richard bristled. His composure slipped for a fraction of a second. You're accusing me. I'm not accusing, Maya interrupted softly. I'm observing, and I believe everyone in this room can see the difference. A heavy silence fell. Charles looked between Richard and Maya, his brow furrowed. One or two executives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes narrowing at Richard now. Finally, Charles spoke, his tone clipped. We will verify the authenticity of both sets of documents. Until then, no conclusion will be drawn. Maya inclined her head. That's fair. Transparency always stands. Richard sat back, lips pressed thin, his eyes cold. But beneath the surface, Maya could sense the cracks. His gambit had failed to land cleanly. As the meeting continued, Maya returned to her presentation, each word deliberate, each fact sharpened like an arrow. But inside, she felt the weight of the moment. She had faced sabotage head-on, not with anger, but with clarity, and the board had seen it. When the session paused again, Amelia leaned close, whispering, That was masterful. You didn't just defend, you turned it back on him. Maya exhaled slowly. We're not out of the woods yet, but the ground is shifting. Across the room. Richard watched her, eyes narrowed, a storm brewing behind them. She knew he wasn't finished, but neither was she. The recess stretched longer this time. Executives huddled in corners, debating quietly. Maya remained seated, calm, her posture rooted. Evelyn Harper's words from the flight echoed in her mind. Sometimes we have to plant ourselves where we are. She had planted herself, and she would not move. At last. Charles called them back once more. His expression was grave, but not unfriendly. "Dr. Henderson, we will proceed to final deliberations tomorrow morning. Tonight, the board will review independently the materials provided, both yours and Mr. Kane's." His gaze lingered on Richard. Richard gave a stiff nod, his mask restored. Maya rose, gathering her portfolio. "I welcome that review. Mr. Whitfield, truth is patient. It waits to be seen." She turned, her eyes briefly locking with Richard's. There was no triumph in her gaze, only resolve. As she and Amelia stepped out into the corridor, the hum of voices behind them fading, Amelia murmured, "He underestimated you again." Maya's lips curved faintly. "And he'll keep doing it. That's his weakness. Mine is forgetting how much it costs to stand. But I won't forget this time." The city lights shimmered beyond the glass as they walked to the elevators. London stretched vast and relentless outside. But Maya carried with her the calm of someone who had faced sabotage and stood taller because of it. The city outside Maya's hotel window glowed in 1,000 shades of amber. Canary Wharf shimmered with light, its glass towers rising like sentinels above the Thames. Cars slid silently across bridges, and the river itself seemed to pulse with the restless energy of London. But inside Maya's suite, the world was still, too still. She had peeled off her jacket, draping it over a chair. Her blouse was slightly wrinkled, her shoulders tight. The adrenaline that carried her through the boardroom had ebbed, leaving behind exhaustion and something heavier, doubt. She sank onto the edge of the bed, fingers laced tightly in her lap. For the first time since boarding at Dallas, she let the mask slip. Her breathing hitched, her chest felt heavy. She whispered aloud, to no one but herself, "Why does it always have to be this hard?" Her own voice startled her. It sounded raw, fragile. She stood, pacing slowly across the carpet, and then back again. She replayed Richard Kane's words, the venom laced beneath his smile, the forged documents projected on the boardroom screen. She had countered. Yes, she had stood her ground. But what if doubt had already been planted too deeply? What if, come morning, the board chose to retreat, to take the safer road away from her, away from Henderson Biotech? The thought pressed against her ribs like a weight. She walked to the desk, opening her laptop. The presentation still glowed on the screen, numbers and charts crisp, unwavering, facts, data, truth. She traced a line on the graph with her finger, her reflection faint in the glass. Facts weren't always enough. She knew that. Too many times, facts had been overshadowed by perception, by bias, by the simple, corrosive belief that she didn't belong. Her throat tightened. She closed the laptop, pushing it aside, and sat heavily in the desk chair. From her purse, she pulled a worn leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled with scribbled ideas, trial notes, sketches of molecules. But tucked in the back was something else, an old photograph. Her grandmother, standing outside a small brick house in Alabama, arms folded, eyes sharp, wearing an apron dusted with flour. The woman who had raised her after her parents died young. The woman who told her, again and again, "Stand like an oak, child. Winds will come, but your roots are deeper." Maya stared at the photo, her fingers trembling slightly. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice, low and steady. "You've already walked through worse storms. Don't let this one turn you back." Her eyes blurred, tears gathering. She hadn't cried in months, not since the FDA approved Henderson Biotech's first therapy. But tonight, the tears came, quiet and unrelenting. She let them fall, her shoulders shaking, the dam breaking in the silence. It wasn't weakness, it was release. When the tears slowed, she sat straighter, wiping her face with the back of her hand. The photo lay on the desk, a silent anchor. She drew in a long breath, letting it fill her lungs, steadying her. There was a knock at the door. Maya blinked, surprised. She crossed the room and opened it. Amelia stood there, her expression soft but concerned. She held 2 paper cups of tea, steam curling upward. "I figured you wouldn't be sleeping," Amelia said simply. Maya stepped aside, and Amelia entered, setting the cups on the desk. She didn't ask questions. She just sat across from Maya, sipping slowly, giving her space. After a long silence, Maya spoke. "Do you ever wonder if it's all worth it?" Amelia met her gaze. "Every day. But then I look at the people who depend on what we're building, the patients, the families, the kids who might get to live normal lives because of what Henderson Biotech is doing. And the answer is always yes." Maya exhaled shakily. "He tried to destroy me today, and tomorrow. He'll try again. Sometimes I think maybe they'll never see me, not for what I've built, but for what I am." Amelia leaned forward, her voice low, firm. "Then make them see, not by shouting, by standing. You've always said dignity isn't negotiable. Prove it again tomorrow. Prove it so loudly that even their silence has to listen." The words struck deep. Maya swallowed hard, nodding slowly. They sat in silence, sipping tea, the city glowing beyond the window. Later, after Amelia left, Maya changed into comfortable clothes and stretched across the bed. She stared at the ceiling, her grandmother's photo still on the desk. Sleep came fitfully, in fragments, dreams of boardrooms and airplanes, of whispers and applause. But beneath them all was a steady current, a truth she couldn't shake. She was tired of fighting to be seen, but she was not finished fighting. When dawn came, pale light spilling across the city, Maya rose with a clarity she hadn't felt the night before. She showered, dressed in a charcoal suit, knotted a silk scarf at her neck. She slipped the photograph into her notebook, tucking it safely into her bag. At the mirror, she paused. Her reflection looked back at her, composed, calm, unyielding. "You belong," she whispered softly, "and today they will know it." The headquarters of Sterling Row Group was buzzing long before Maya arrived. Cameras clustered near the revolving glass doors, their lenses hungry for a glimpse of her. Journalists whispered into microphones, speculating about the day's vote. Employees hurried past, eyes flicking nervously toward the press. The whole building seemed to hum with anticipation. Maya stepped from the car, her heels clicking on the polished stone walkway. The morning light caught the silk scarf at her neck, the one she had chosen deliberately a quiet flash of color, a reminder that even in a storm she could claim her own shade of grace. For a heartbeat, the crowd hushed. Then shutters clicked like distant thunder. She didn't flinch. She walked straight through the doors, Amelia a steady presence at her side. Inside, the lobby felt cooler, the marble floors gleaming. A receptionist glanced up, startled, then quickly rose, offering a small, respectful nod. Word had traveled fast. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. Amelia's hand brushed against Maya's arm, grounding her. When the doors slid open, the boardroom awaited. It was larger than she remembered. Long mahogany table, sleek leather chairs, a wall of glass overlooking the city. Seated around the table were men and women in tailored suits, expressions carefully neutral. At the head sat Charles Whitfield, chairman of Sterling Row Group, his silver hair catching the light, and to his right, Richard Kane. His smile was thin, sharp as glass. "Maya," he said smoothly as she entered, "we weren't sure you'd come back after yesterday." She met his gaze. "You should have been sure." The room shifted, subtle but palpable. Charles gestured. "Let's begin. We have a full agenda." Maya took her seat, Amelia at her shoulder with a folder of documents. The air felt taut, every breath measured. Richard wasted no time. He rose, striding to the screen at the far end. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice dripping with confidence. "Yesterday we reviewed serious concerns about Henderson Biotech's stability. But overnight, new information came to light. A click of the remote. Documents flashed onto the screen. Supposed email chains, contracts, signatures. They painted a damning picture, inflated numbers, hidden debts, questionable trials. Maya's heart hammered. These were fabrications, she knew it, but the precision, the detail, was terrifying. Whoever had helped Richard forge them had been skilled. Murmurs rippled through the room. Charles's brow furrowed. A few board members leaned back, arms folded. Doubt was spreading like smoke. Richard turned, letting the silence stretch. "As you can see, this raises questions not just about Dr. Henderson's leadership, but about her company's very integrity. Can we, in good conscience, tie Sterling Row's future to this?" The knife was buried deep. He folded his arms, eyes gleaming. Maya rose slowly, her palm steady against the table. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at the faces around her, the men and women who would decide her fate. "These documents are lies," she said evenly, "and Richard knows it. But more important than what's on that screen is why it's on that screen. Ask yourself who benefits from burying Henderson Biotech. Who gains if I'm discredited?" Her voice was calm, but it carried. Richard scoffed. "Accusations. Nothing more." Maya held up a hand. "Not accusations. Proof." Amelia stepped forward, placing a slim drive on the table. Maya nodded to her, then looked back at the board. "Last night," Maya continued, "we traced irregular activity in Sterling Row's internal servers. Files were altered, metadata scrubbed, but not completely. We have logs, timestamps, IP addresses. Every trail leads back to one office, Richard Kane's." The room went still. Charles leaned forward. "You have this evidence?" "Yes," Maya said simply, "and I've already submitted it to an independent forensic firm. Their preliminary report confirms the manipulation. By tomorrow morning, you'll have the final copy in your hands." Richard's face blanched, then hardened. "This is absurd, fabricated." But a crack had already appeared in his composure. Maya pressed on, her tone unwavering. "Gentlemen, ladies, yesterday I stood here accused. Today I stand here with the truth. Henderson Biotech has nothing to hide. Our numbers are clean. Our trials are transparent. Our therapies are saving lives." Richard tried to bury that under a mountain of lies because he couldn't beat us on merit. So he tried deceit. And when deceit failed, he tried fear. Her eyes swept the room. But fear isn't leadership. Truth is, integrity is. And that's what I bring. Not just for Henderson Biotech, but for every partnership we build, including this one. Silence. Every gaze fixed on her. Then, softly but firmly, Charles spoke. "Mr. Kane, sit down." Richard froze. "Charles, sit down." His voice brooked no argument. Richard's jaw clenched. but he sank into his chair, seething. Charles turned back to Maya. "Dr. Henderson, thank you. We will review the evidence as it comes, but I believe you've made your case." The tension broke like a wave. Some board members nodded slightly. One even allowed a faint smile. The tide was shifting, unmistakably. Richard's fist clenched on the table. He leaned forward, hissing. "This isn't over." Maya met his glare with quiet steel. "It never is. But I am." And with that, she sat. For a long moment, the boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the projector. Outside the windows, the city stretched endlessly, alive and indifferent. But inside, something irreversible had happened. The balance of power had shifted. The meeting continued, votes cast, resolutions debated, but the outcome was clear. Maya had not just survived. She had prevailed. As the session adjourned, Charles stood, addressing the room. "Let it be noted Sterling Rowe Group will proceed with the Henderson Biotech Partnership. Dr. Henderson, we look forward to building a future together." Applause rose, hesitant at first, then firm. Maya inclined her head, gratitude tempered by resolve. She had won the battle. Yes, but the war for dignity, for equity, was far from over. When she exited the boardroom, the hallway was lined with employees. Some clapped softly. Others simply watched, eyes bright with something unspoken hope. Amelia touched her arm. "You did it." Maya allowed herself a small smile. "No, we did." As they walked toward the elevators, cameras waiting below, Maya thought of her grandmother's words. "Stand like an oak. Winds will come, but your roots are deeper." And today, those roots had held. The elevator doors opened to a storm. Reporters surged forward, microphones bristling, cameras flashing like lightning in a summer storm. Security guards stepped in, forming a protective cordon. But there was no way to silence the roar of questions. "Dr. Henderson, how do you respond to the allegations? Is it true? You exposed Mr. Kane for document fraud. Will Henderson, biotech still partner with Sterling Rowe. Do you believe racial bias played a role in this?" The flood of words hit all at once, sharp and insistent. For a moment, Maya stood perfectly still. She could have ducked her head, hurried to the car, let Amelia shield her from the noise. But that wasn't why she had come back. She raised a hand. The crowd quieted. Not completely, but enough that her voice could carry. "I will say this once, and clearly." She began. Her voice was steady, the same voice she had used in the boardroom, the same voice that had once soothed frightened interns during a lab fire years ago. "The documents Mr. Kane presented were false. The truth is, Henderson Biotech is strong, transparent, and committed to saving lives. And yes, bias was part of what happened to me on that flight. And bias is part of what too many people face every single day. But I believe in answering bias with truth, with dignity, and with accountability." The questions fired up again, but the cameras captured what mattered: her posture, her calm, her refusal to shrink. Amelia leaned in quietly. "Car's ready." Maya nodded. She gave one last look at the cameras and added, "This isn't just about me. It's about every passenger told they don't belong, every professional doubted, every voice dismissed. We can do better. We must do better." And with that, she walked through the crowd, each step a declaration that she would not be diminished. Outside, the black sedan waited. As the door shut behind her, muffling the noise, she exhaled. Amelia sat beside her, tablet already buzzing with updates. "Social media's on fire," Amelia reported. #StandWithMaya is trending top 3 worldwide. Clips of you at the press line are everywhere. News anchors are calling it one of the most decisive public takedowns of corporate sabotage in years. Maya looked out the window as the car pulled into traffic. The streets of London blurred past, alive with people who would never know her but might feel the ripple of her choices. "Let them trend," she murmured. "What matters is what changes." Still, part of her couldn't help but wonder what her grandmother would have said if she could see this. Probably something simple. "Child, storms will always come, but you were made to walk through rain and come out shining." Hours later, footage of the confrontation had already made its way across the Atlantic. In New York, CNN aired the boardroom excerpts. In Atlanta, Black-owned stations replayed her press statement alongside community leaders' commentary. On social media, strangers shared their own stories of being doubted at airports, of being asked for proof of belonging, of being talked over in meetings. A young teacher in Chicago tweeted, "She stood for all of us who've been told we're in the wrong seat." A nurse in Houston replied, "And she didn't scream. She didn't rage. She stood tall." That's power. For every insult in the comment threads, 10 voices rose to drown it out. By evening, corporate leaders were weighing in. Some issued careful statements about reviewing protocols. Others praised her directly. A Fortune 500 CEO posted on LinkedIn, "Maya Henderson showed us today that integrity outlasts sabotage." We'd all do well to remember that. Even within Sterling Rowe's own walls, murmurs spread. Employees whispered about Richard Kane's impending fall, about how a woman who had walked into the boardroom as an outsider left as the future. That night, back in her hotel suite overlooking the Thames, Maya sat with a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind exhaustion and an ache deep in her bones. But beneath that, something steadier thrummed, a quiet certainty that she had shifted more than her own fate. Amelia sat across from her, scrolling through the flood of updates. "You realize what you did today, don't you?" Maya smiled faintly. "I stopped a liar." Amelia shook her head. "No. You gave people something they've been starving for, proof that you can face power and not bow, that you can be underestimated and still rise, that you can be treated like you don't belong and still claim your seat. That's bigger than you. Maya, that's a message." Maya looked down at the tea, steam curling like ghostly fingers. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, "If it helps even one person feel less alone, then it's worth it." The next morning brought headlines. Henderson exposes corporate sabotage in landmark boardroom showdown. Bias backfires CEO, turns humiliation into power move. Stand with Maya becomes global rallying cry. Talk shows replayed clips of her walking through reporters, scarf bright against the storm of cameras. Commentators dissected every line of her press statement, some praising her poise, others grudgingly admitting she had turned the narrative on its head. And then came the twist Maya hadn't expected: messages from everyday travelers, parents whose kids had been questioned at airports, women who had been told their cards didn't look right, men asked if they were really in business class. Each story carried a sting, but also a thread of connection. They weren't just watching her story. They were seeing their own reflected in it. That realization hit her hardest. This wasn't just corporate drama. It was lived truth, multiplied across countless lives. And maybe, just maybe, her storm could light a path. Later that afternoon, Henderson Biotech's offices released an official statement. It was simple, but deliberate. Integrity matters. Dignity matters. Truth matters. Henderson Biotech remains committed to these principles. in every partnership and every action. The statement closed with a line that soon echoed across the internet. Every seat has worth, and every person belongs. By evening, a journalist emailed Amelia with a pointed question. Dr. Henderson, people are calling you a symbol. Do you accept that role? Maya read it twice before answering. Finally, she typed back, I don't aim to be a symbol. I aim to be myself. But if my story helps others stand taller, then I will not step back from that light. It was published the next morning. The word spread faster than she could have imagined. As London's skyline faded behind her days later, Maya sat on the flight home, gazing out at clouds tinged gold by the setting sun. This time, no one questioned her ticket. No one asked her to move. Flight attendants approached with quiet respect. But she knew the work wasn't finished. The storm had only cleared one path. More skies awaited. And more storms, too. She closed her eyes, resting her head back. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe not in fear, not in defense, but in peace. The first week back in the States felt surreal. Henderson Biotech's offices in Atlanta buzzed like a hive. Employees carried themselves taller, prouder, as if Maya's defiance had given them each a new spine of steel. For the first time in months, she sensed joy in the air, hope that went beyond sales targets or research milestones. But Maya herself moved with a quieter rhythm. Each morning she walked through the glass doors, nodding to the receptionist, who always smiled a little wider now. She spent afternoons in meetings, but her mind often drifted back to the countless emails and letters pouring in from strangers. One came from a mother in Detroit. My daughter saw you on the news. She's 12. She said, Mom, she looks like me. Maybe I can be CEO one day. Another, from a man in Dallas. I've been told to move out of first class 3 times in my life. Watching you stand your ground made me feel like I wasn't crazy, like it wasn't just me. She read them late into the night, sometimes with tears welling in her eyes. These weren't just words. They were lives, marked by the same sting of being told you don't belong. One Friday evening, Amelia knocked gently on her office door. Still here, Maya looked up from a stack of letters. I can't seem to stop reading them. Amelia smiled softly. Then maybe it's time to do something with them. What do you mean, channel it? These stories, they need more than your quiet tears. They need a home, a purpose. The seed took root. By Monday, Henderson Biotech announced the creation of the Horizon Scholars Fund, a scholarship for underrepresented students in science, technology, and business. It would cover tuition, mentorship, and even travel, ensuring that no one would be told they didn't belong simply because of who they were. The announcement made headlines, but for Maya, the truest moment came weeks later, when she stood in front of the first group of Horizon Scholars, 50 students, wide-eyed, nervous, and eager. She looked at them and saw reflections of herself at their age, the hunger, the doubt, the spark waiting to ignite. You are not here by accident, she told them. You belong in every room you walk into. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Applause rose, but she didn't need it. The light in their eyes was enough. Still, Richard Kane's shadow lingered. Investigations confirmed Maya's evidence. His office had indeed tampered with internal files. He resigned under pressure, stripped of title and reputation. For months, the media dissected his fall, but Maya rarely commented. Her victory wasn't about his ruin. It was about something larger. And slowly, that larger thing began to unfold. Airlines revised protocols. Training manuals were updated to emphasize dignity, not just efficiency. Independent watchdog groups called for audits of passenger treatment. Even Sterling Row itself adopted a dignity-first policy, requiring staff at every level to undergo anti-bias training. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. The very company that had tried to bury her was now reshaping itself in her image. One crisp autumn evening, she sat on her porch, the Georgia air carrying the scent of pine and earth. A cup of coffee warmed her hands. Across the yard, kids played tag, their laughter spilling like music. Amelia joined her, setting down a folder thick with reports. "You know, the press is calling you the Oak CEO." Maya chuckled softly. "Because of that line about roots and storms." "Exactly. They're saying you didn't just survive. You showed how to bend without breaking, how to stand without shouting." Maya sipped her coffee, eyes tracing the horizon as the sun sank in molten streaks. "I don't want to be a tree people just look at. I want to be shade for someone else. Shelter. Strength." "You already are," Amelia said. Weeks later, Maya found herself on a stage in Washington, D.C., invited to testify before Congress on corporate accountability. Cameras blinked, senators leaned forward, and she spoke not of her humiliation, but of the millions who lived versions of it every day. "This isn't just about first-class seats," she said. "It's about the invisible barriers that tell people, you don't belong. And every time we allow that message to stand, we rob ourselves of brilliance, of contribution, of humanity. We can't afford that anymore." Her words rippled outward, sparking debates, policies, reforms. Not all were perfect, not all immediate, but the tide had turned. Months later, the Horizon scholars gathered again, this time for a dinner celebrating their first semester. They surprised her with a gift, a framed photograph of themselves, each holding a sign that read, "I belong." She stood at the front of the room, throat tight, unable to speak for a long moment. Finally, she managed. "That's the only proof I'll ever need that this storm was worth it." Applause swelled, warm and unrestrained. Later that night, as she walked alone beneath the stars, she let herself remember the flight, the humiliation, the sting of being told she didn't belong in a seat she had paid for, the ache of eyes watching, waiting for her to break. And she remembered the choice she made not to rage, not to retreat, but to rise. That choice had changed her path, and in small ways, it was changing others too. She whispered into the night, as if her grandmother were listening. The winds came, but the roots held, and with that, she smiled. Not because the world was suddenly fair, not because the storms had ended, but because she knew, with every fiber of her being, that the next time someone was told you don't belong, they might remember her story, and maybe, just maybe, they would stand taller. Life often places us in moments where dignity is tested in subtle but painful ways. The story of Dr. Maya Henderson reminds us that the true measure of strength isn't always in raising our voice. It is in refusing to let others silence our worth. She was humiliated in public, yet she chose to answer with composure, with evidence, and with grace. For older audiences, this lesson may strike a familiar chord. Many have lived through times when fairness wasn't guaranteed, when walking into a room meant carrying the weight of doubt. Maya's journey tells us something vital. Storms will come, but roots can hold. The deeper message is that injustice cannot be met only with anger, nor only with silence. It must be met with courage, dignity, and truth. These are values that transcend age, race, or profession. They are human values. So, the next time you are told, directly or indirectly, that you don't belong, pause, breathe, And remember Maya's example. You may not control the storm, but you can choose how you stand in it. And sometimes, that choice can inspire change far beyond yourself. Thank you for walking through this journey with us. Stories like this remind us that dignity and justice belong to everyone. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so together we can keep spreading voices of courage and hope.